The Nikkei is already at a 1990 high. It's been one of the strongest markets in the world this year. So do we still have room to run higher?
I think we do. I think we've had enormous amount of changes in Japan, and yes, the market's kind of finally reflecting that. There's been an enormous amount of changing in voting by domestic shareholders. There's been increased profitability by Japanese companies, and there's been increased amounts of buybacks and dividends. So yes, Japan, I think, still is cheap.
How much of that optimism comes domestically and from foreign investors? Because we have seen this sort of optimism in the past under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Junichiro Koizumi, and that didn't necessarily last.
That's true, and you're right. Foreigners have been a net seller. I think the numbers are like $140 billion of equity since 2014. So yes, most of that interest is coming from domestic shareholders. Foreigners have just started to be a net buyer. So yes, for the last 8 weeks, foreigners have been net buyers, and that's after being a net sellers last year, the year before, and the year before that. So I think there's actually there's a massive amount of underweight of Japan by foreigners, and so foreigners are just waking up to hearing, actually, you know what? There's actually a ton that's gone on in Japan. There's been a lot of work that's done there, and it's interesting again.
Shery mentioned there Shinzo Abe, and of course, when I think of Shinzo Abe, I think of the 3 arrows policy, and that third arrow that never quite got away about corporate governance and reform. Where do you think we're placed in terms of that in Japan's companies at the moment?
Oh, I think that arrow's gotten away. I just think they've taken a long time to hit home. I think there's been 10 years of changes since the shot of that arrow, and that arrow has actually accelerated on its way home. You've seen dramatic changes in corporate behavior, and yes, as I mentioned, in buybacks and dividends. You see dramatic changes in terms of engagement by shareholders. There's a record number of shareholder proposals this year, not because shareholders are both engaged, but because also they have a much larger chance of being successful with domestic votes increasing against management. You see it in large companies like in Canon with the support for the CEO of only 50.59%. So there's like enormous amount of changes. But yeah, that arrow took like 10 years to get home, but I think it's there now. When it hit its target.
Yeah, and of course, the Tokyo Stock Exchange has got a new CEO, and he's urging companies to engage more actively with active investors such as yourself. Have you noticed any change more recently in terms of getting a bit more traction?
Sure, everybody's looking for that magic bullet. I don't think it's just that magic bullet. I think every one of these changes are incremental and been helpful. Yes, you've seen the TSE go ahead and say, look, we want companies to trade above 1 times price to book, and if not, we'd like them to explain why they're not. But really, we'd like to kind of put additional pressure on them to increase their share prices above 1 times price to book. You have lots of foreigners that said, what is it? Is book even important? Because you have a lot of companies, or most companies abroad, trade at 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times price to book. Only in Japan is that a very meaningful metric. But yes, those most recent changes are important. There's been a whole host of other kind of increased voting changes by domestic asset managers. And you've had METI's guidance on M&A, which has also been really helpful, that companies have to open themselves up to effective M&A, which even might launch hostile M&A in Japan.